Hello Saints, welcome in for another midweek video. There's an old adage that you've probably heard many times. It says, when in Rome, do as the Romans. Well, the first thing you have to do to fulfill that statement is you got to get to Rome. You got to be in Rome. The Apostle Paul had a desire to go to Rome. He'd been many places, served many people. He had a contingent of believers and followers, disciples, I guess, in Rome, but he had never been there. Matter of fact, he wrote in his letter to them, that I may find a way in the will of God to come to you. He was really wanting God to permit him and to allow him to go to Rome and meet these Roman Christians that he'd been discipling long distance, I suppose. He even said shortly thereafter, he said, I long to see you. There was a longing in his heart to get to Rome. Little did he know what he had to go through to get there. The story and the history of the Apostle Paul is a fascinating one. And we're just touching a small part today. And that is God bringing him to Rome. Of course, he was brought up on charges for preaching the gospel and saying some things that made some of the leaders uncomfortable. He was jailed, and ultimately he wound up using his Roman citizenship. Don't miss this. He wound up using his Roman citizenship to appeal to Caesar. So they would remove him from Agrippa and Festus and those others that he was in front of, and they sent him to Italy so he could appear before Caesar. That's wisdom. That's being smart like a fox. We need to learn a lesson from the Apostle Paul. But anyway, he does. They say, we're going to take you. He's still a prisoner. So they put him on a ship, and he begins to sail. The last few chapters of the book of Acts chronicles this. We're not going to read all of that. But he knows that no matter what's happening, no matter what's going on in his world, the end of this is going to be when he gets to Rome. That's the goal. And so they're on the ship. The ship's captain ignores Paul's warnings that there's going to be a storm, they're going to have problems. He sails the ship right into the storm. They wound up shipwrecked. Probably Paul and whoever was with him, I'm sure Aristarchus was, they're probably the only Christians on this ship. And he kept telling them, the Lord has shown me that we will all be fine. No one will die. And he even at one point, there were some prisoners, other prisoners, that were trying to leave the boat and escape. And he grabbed them somehow and said, hey, don't do this. We're going to be fine. We're going to be just fine. And so even in the midst of being a prisoner, even in the midst of being captured, so to speak, by his surroundings, he still found a way to minister to those people with whom he was sailing. And of course, they go to the island of Malta and they meet the natives. And as he's gathering firewood, don't miss that. The Apostle Paul did not bark orders and point for people to do things. They needed firewood, so what did the Apostle Paul do? He went and got firewood. Now, he wasn't the only one, but he was gathering firewood with everybody else. There are no prima donnas in the kingdom of God. And I'll stop right there before I go too far. But while he's gathering firewood, a snake bites him on the hand, latches on. He, of course, drops that snake into the fire. I'm sorry, Peter. That's the way it happened. And of course, the natives, when he didn't die, they said, oh, he's dead. It was a viper. They said, he's dead. Well, he didn't die. And they began to look and say, wait a minute, he's still living. He must be a god. So they tried to worship him, and he said, oh, no, I'm a man just like you. All of this is getting him to Rome. He said, I want to find a way in the will of God to come to you, to see you, to visit with you. Listen to his description. There were some false prophets in Corinth, and he was answering their charges, and he said, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. This is 2 Corinthians 11, by the way. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. He said, I am more. In labors, more abundant. In stripes, above measure. In prisons, more frequently. In deaths, often. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned, and then he addresses this. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings, often in cold and nakedness. And then he says this, besides the other things, what comes upon me daily. That's a pretty good list without adding besides the other things. But he goes through this gauntlet of life. And where is he headed? He's headed to Rome. And when he gets to Rome, this phrase recently just jumped off the page to me. If I can find it, there it is. It just jumped off the page to me when they finally arrive at Rome, and this is chapter 28. It says, when we came to Rome. When we came to Rome. When we got to Rome. When we arrived at Rome. This was their destination. It was not the end of his life. It was not the end of his ministry, but it was the end of this section of his ministry. And why am I dealing with this? Because every one of you watching this video, you have a Rome. You have somewhere God's pointing you. You have somewhere that God's bringing you along. Now, you may be going through proverbial shipwrecks. You may be bitten by imaginary animals, life. You may be dealing with unsavory characters. You may be dealing with any number of situations in life and lifestyles. And you may be wondering, am I ever going to get to my Rome? But like the Apostle Paul, you can have confidence that if God ordained it, he's going to cause it to happen. I'm sure there were times when he was in a dark place in a dungeon, when he had a prison guard chained to him. I'm sure he thought, well, maybe, I hope this happens. But when he got on that ship, he knew, regardless of what happened, they were going to be okay, and he was going to make it to Rome. And he did when he came to Rome. I'm telling you today, don't falter. Don't faint. Don't give up. God has a Rome in your future, and you may be going through a gauntlet of life to get there. You may be dealing with difficult people, difficult circumstances, adverse situations, and most of that you probably have no control over. But I want to tell you that God's going to get you to your Rome. And when he does, Paul had an opportunity once he was there. They said, well, you're a pretty good guy. They let him rent a house, and he taught. The scripture ends, book of Acts ends with him saying he taught the kingdom of God to all those who would come. Again, he got released from this imprisonment later on, and he continued his ministry, but he made it to his Rome. And I pray that you know that you're on your way to your Rome. Your God will get you there. And then when it comes time, you can say, when I came to Rome. You have a good week, a good day today, and go out there and act like somebody.